Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at lab-grown meat.
Oh, yeah, this should be good.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. We've got a bunch of different sources this time. We've got some YouTube videos.
I always like those.
Yeah, me too.
Mm.
So we've got No Carb Life, and what I've learned, both had some pretty interesting things to say.
Okay.
And then we also have an article from a scientific journal, and then some news articles from the UK and Italy, which is pretty interesting.
Oh, wow, international.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And we even have like a doctor's perspective on red meat, which is interesting.
Okay.
So yeah, lots to cover. And our goal today is to figure out, is this lab-grown meat stuff, is it the future of food or is it just hype,
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it?
So let's dive in. It's
Yeah.
interesting right off the bat, just how many different opinions there are about this topic.
Yeah.
You've got, these big names like Bill Gates and the World Economic Forum, and they're putting tons of money and resources into this lab-grown meat.
Yeah.
And they're saying, this is going to save the planet. This is going to solve world hunger.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, you have people who are, really skeptical.
Yeah.
They're worried about what this could mean. Like, are corporations going to control the food supply?
Right.
Is this stuff even healthy? There are a lot of questions.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot to unpack here. So let's start with maybe like the positive side.
Yeah.
Why are all these like big players so invested in this? What are the benefits that they're talking about?
Well, a lot of people who are really into lab-grown meat, they talk about the environmental impact,
Okay.
They say that growing meat in the lab, it's going to take less land, less water, less energy than raising, cows and chickens and pigs.
Right.
And that's, better for the planet.
Yeah, makes sense.
And also, they brought up animal welfare a lot.
Mhm.
If we're not raising animals for meat,
Yeah.
then there's less suffering.
So less impact on the planet, happier animals. That all sounds pretty good. But I'm curious about the actual like process, Can you really grow meat in a lab that's going to taste good and be affordable? I mean, the What I've Learned video, they seem pretty skeptical.
Yeah, they brought up some good points.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not as easy as just like throwing some cells in a petri dish and boom, you've got a steak.
Right.
It's a lot more complicated than that.
Yeah.
You have to recreate the biological processes that happen inside of an animal.
Right.
And to do that, you need to be able to really precisely control the temperature and the nutrients and how much oxygen there is. It's really complicated.
So that's where the big wall of no comes in, right? Like the idea that there are all these huge scientific and technological challenges to make this actually work.
Exactly. They were saying that we would need like multiple Nobel Prize-winning breakthroughs just to get the cost down to where it would be competitive with regular meat.
Wow.
And they brought up that example of the lab-grown chicken nuggets that cost $50 each.
Yeah, that was crazy.
Can you imagine trying to feed your family with that?
Not on my budget.
No kidding.
And they talked about some companies, too, that have kind of failed or struggled.
Right, like Zymergen and Eat.
Yeah.
Just, they made these big promises, but they haven't really been able to deliver. And I think those examples show just how hard it is to actually scale up this technology.
Yeah, I mean, Zymergen, they were going to, like, revolutionize the chemical industry.
Yeah.
But they couldn't make it work on a large scale.
Right, and Ito. Just, they've had some success, but people are saying their projections were too optimistic, and there might even be some food safety issues.
Interesting.
Yeah, and there's that whole contamination risk, too, with those bioreactors, those giant tanks where they grow the cells.
Right. I think they called it the $1 Million Club or something in the video.
Yeah, because you have these scientists who accidentally ruin these entire batches of, valuable pharmaceuticals or whatever because of contamination.
Oh, wow.
And if that happens with something you're going to eat, that's a pretty big deal.
That's scary. Yeah.
And even with new technology like perfusion technology, which some companies are saying is going to solve these problems, the What I've Learned video was still pretty skeptical.
Okay, so it sounds like the science and the economics of this are still really uncertain, but then there's this whole other layer of concern about, like, control, right? And who's going to have the power in this new system.
Yeah, and that's where things get really interesting. No Carb Life goes into this in detail, and they talk about Bill Gates and how much farmland he owns.
Mm-hmm.
And they also talk about the World Economic Forum and how they're pushing for people to eat less meat.
Yeah.
And their argument is that this is all part of a bigger plan to take control of the food supply and put that control in the hands of corporations.
Okay, so they're worried that if we all switch to lab-grown meat, will be dependent on these companies for something that's like a basic human need.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And they contrast that with how meat production works now, which is pretty decentralized.
Of-
You can raise livestock pretty much anywhere. But if you want to make lab-grown meat, you need these specialized facilities and technology.
Right.
And chances are those are going to be owned and controlled by a handful of powerful companies.
So that raises some questions about like access and affordability too, right?
Now, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, if lab-grown meat becomes the norm,
Yeah.
what happens to the people who can't afford it
Yeah.
or who just prefer real meat,
Right.
Could we end up with a situation where only rich people get to eat real food?
That's a scary thought. Yeah.
It is. And no carb life also makes the point that lab-grown meat is a patented product.
Mhm.
It's something that corporations control, whereas real meat is just that it's real. It's a natural resource.
Yeah. That's a good point.
So it's about freedom and choice too,
Yeah, so we've got the potential benefits, we've got these challenges with the science and the economics, and then we've got this whole issue of control. But even if we set all that aside for a minute, there's still the question of nutrition, like, is this stuff actually good for us?
Yeah, that's a big one. And both No Carb Life and Dr. Eric Berg, DC, they have some interesting things to say about that.
Okay, so what did they say about the nutritional differences between lab-grown meat and, the meat that comes from animals?
Well, they both kind of argued that real meat is better for you nutritionally in a few key ways.
Okay, how so?
Well, like No Carb Life, they were saying that real meat has, it's a complete protein,
Mm-hmm.
which means it's got all those essential amino acids our bodies need.
Right.
And those amino acids, they're like really easy for your body to use, like they're bioavailable.
So it's like a really efficient protein source.
Exactly. And lab-grown meat, it often uses like seed oils and synthetic vitamins.
Oh, okay.
And it might even have to be like fortified with nutrients that are naturally found in real meat.
Interesting.
So, it raises some questions about just how nutritious it really is.
Yeah, it's interesting that they bring up seed oils because, like, that's been a kind of hot topic lately in the nutrition world. What about the Dr. Eric Berg DC video? He loves red meat, doesn't he?
He does. He actually says that red meat is the best food for healing and repair, like the single best food.
Wow, really?
Yeah, and he talks about how it's got a lot of protein, obviously, but also like all these key nutrients like carnitine and creatine and carnosine and CoQ10.
Okay, and what do those do?
Well, he says they can like boost your energy levels, help you if you're like an athlete, improve performance,
Mm,
and even like help you live longer.
wow.
He talks about carnosine specifically. It's really high in red meat,
Okay.
and it's like a powerful antioxidant. It can protect your muscles from damage, and it might even help slow down aging.
Huh, so he's like all in on red meat.
Oh yeah, he's a big fan, but he does say that it might not be good for everyone, like people with certain genetic conditions that affect how they absorb iron.
Oh.
Because too much iron can be a problem for some people, but for most people, he's like, yeah, eat your red meat.
Interesting. Okay, so we've got challenges with the science and the economics, the control issues, and now this whole nutrition debate. What about the environmental impact? I mean, isn't that one of the main arguments in favor of lab-grown meat?
Yeah, it is. They say it's going to use less resources and produce less greenhouse gas emissions compared to like raising livestock.
But our sources didn't all agree on that, did they?
No, not really. Some critics, they were citing a study from UC Davis.
Okay.
And they were saying that lab-grown meat could actually have a bigger carbon footprint than conventional meat.
Really?
Yeah, they said all the energy it takes to grow the meat in those bioreactors and then like the resources you need to make the growth media, that stuff, it could all add up to be worse for the environment.
Wow. So it's not really clear-cut then?
No, not at all. And you have to think about like transportation and distribution too. They have to ship this lab-grown meat all over the place. That's going to add to the environmental impact too.
So it's complicated.
Yeah, it really is.
Okay, so we've covered a lot here. The potential benefits, the challenges, the concerns, the nutrition, the environmental impact. It's like a lot to wrap your head around.
It is. It's a lot.
Yeah.
But I think it helps if you kind of zoom out and look at the bigger picture.
What do you mean?
Well, we're not just talking about like the science of growing meat in a lab.
Yeah.
We're talking about like a fundamental shift in how we produce and consume food.
Right.
And that has implications for our health,
Yeah.
for the environment, for like society as a whole.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
It is. So for the average person listening to this, like, what does it all mean?
Yeah.
How do we make sense of all this information and make good choices about what we eat?
That's the question.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, it's up to each individual to decide what's right for them.
Yeah.
But having this deeper understanding, knowing the potential benefits and the risks and hearing the different perspectives,
Hmm.
I think that can help you make choices that are aligned with your values and what's important to you.
I agree. I think that's what we're all about here. Giving you the information you need to form your own opinions. I'm not trying to tell you what to think.
Exactly. We just want to empower you to think critically.
Right. So, as we're kind of thinking about the future of food,
Yeah.
are we willing to maybe give up some of the nutritional value and the taste of real meat for the promise of a food system that's more sustainable and ethical?
Mm-hmm.
And are we okay with giving corporations even more power over our food supply? Those are big questions.
They are. And it's interesting that a lot of the people who are excited about lab-grown meat, they focus on those potential benefits.
Right.
But the critics, they're more worried about the risks.
Yeah. Which makes sense. I guess we all tend to focus on the information that supports what we already believe.
It's true, but it's important to challenge those beliefs.
I agree. Okay, so for our listeners who are maybe still on the fence about lab-grown meat, what are some of the key takeaways they should keep in mind?
Well, I think the most important thing is that the science is still developing.
Okay.
There's a lot we don't know yet. And those claims about how sustainable and affordable it's going to be, those haven't been proven.
Yeah, and like with any new technology, there are probably going to be some unintended consequences. We have to think about what this could mean for farmers and the ethical implications of using animal cells to make food and, the possibility that these corporations could end up controlling our access to real food.
Yeah, those are all really important points. And on a personal level, each of us has to think about our own nutritional needs and what we like to eat.
Mm-hmm.
If you do well on a diet that includes red meat, then maybe these lab-grown alternatives aren't the best choice for you.
Right. But for people who are trying to eat less meat or who are open to trying new things,
Yeah,
lab-grown meat could be an option down the road if they can figure out how to solve all those challenges.
exactly. I think the takeaway here is that there's no right answer for everyone.
It's about making informed choices.
That's it. And that's what we're here for, to help you navigate this whole new world of food.
And make the best decisions for yourself and your family.
Exactly.
Now, with all that said, there was one thing from the No Carb Life video that really stuck with me.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
They were talking about how Bill Gates is involved in both lab-grown meat and traditional farmland.
Right. He's investing in lab-grown meat companies,
Mm-hmm.
but he also owns a ton of farmland.
Yeah, like he's the biggest private owner of farmland in the U.S.
Kind of weird, right?
Yeah, it seems like a contradiction if he thinks lab-grown meat is the future. Why is he buying up all this land?
It's a good question. I mean, maybe he's just hedging his bets, and investing in both sides.
Hmm.
Or maybe it's something more strategic, like he wants to control both real meat and lab-grown meat.
It's hard to know what his plan is.
It is,
Yeah.
but it just shows how important it is to think critically about all of this,
Yeah.
We can't just believe everything we hear. We have to dig deeper, ask questions, and think about, what are people's motivations?
It makes me think of that saying, follow the money.
Yeah, exactly. Where the money goes tells you a lot about what's really going on.
So for everyone listening, if you're curious about the future of food, don't just take the word of these billionaires and big organizations.
Right. Do your own research.
Yeah, look at different perspectives and figure out what kind of food future you want to be a part of.
And don't be afraid to ask some tough questions.
Yeah, because as we've seen, even something that seems simple like lab-grown meat can be really complicated.
It's true.
We need to be informed and engaged, especially when it comes to something as important as our food.
Absolutely. It's interesting to see how different countries are reacting to this whole lab-grown meat thing.
Yeah.
Like the UK, they're really pushing for it.
Mm-hmm.
They see it as like a big economic opportunity, and a chance to be a leader in this new technology.
Yeah.
But then you've got Italy, and they've basically banned it.
Really?
Yeah, they're worried about protecting their food traditions and their culture.
Oh, wow. That's a big contrast.
It is. It's like a battle of the food philosophies or something.
Yeah, it makes you wonder what's going to happen in the rest of the world.
Right. Is this going to become the norm, or is it just going to be like a niche thing for rich people?
Yeah,
I
guess we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah. But one thing's for sure, consumers are going to have a lot of say in this.
Right.
Like if people don't want to eat it or they don't want to pay a lot of money for it,
Yeah.
then this whole industry is going to have a hard time getting off the ground.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think taste is a big factor, too.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I mean, if it doesn't taste good as real meat, why bother?
Exactly. And that's one of the biggest challenges they're facing.
Right.
Like they're trying to recreate the flavor and the texture of real meat.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really hard to do. Remember that cell slurry that the What I've Learned video talked about?
Yeah,
Not very appetizing.
not really, but Hey, maybe they'll come up with some like fancy marketing terms to make it sound better.
Oh, I'm sure they will. Something like cellular agriculture or
Yeah.
biocrafted protein.
Yeah, exactly.
But, even with all the marketing in the world, there's this bigger question about, like, what is food really about?
Right.
It's not just about filling our stomachs.
Hmm.
It's about culture. It's about tradition. It's about connecting with people. Like
Absolutely.
sharing a meal with your family or friends.
Yeah.
It's a really special thing.
Yeah. There's something about kicking a steak on the grill or, having a roast chicken with people you love.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine getting that same feeling from like a lab-grown burger.
Does it change our relationship with food, with nature, with ourselves?
Yeah.
It's kind of deep.
It is. This whole conversation is making me think about food in a whole new way.
That's what we like to hear.
Yeah.
That's the power of a deep dive,
Yeah.
It makes you question things and see things from different angles. And I think it's important to remember that there are a lot of valid concerns about this lab-grown meat.
Yeah.
It's not a simple solution, and it comes with its own set of challenges and risks.
This deep dive has definitely shown us that, we've got the potential benefits, less environmental impact, animal welfare, maybe even a way to solve food shortages. But then we've also got those scientific and economic hurdles, the ethical concerns, the control issues, the nutritional debate, and then those questions about the environmental impact. It's a lot.
It is. It's a lot to think about. And while lab-grown meat might be part of the future of food, the question isn't really if it's the future, but what kind of future? What are the trade-offs and who's going to benefit from this?
Those are great points. And, as we wrap up here, I keep thinking about that funny line from the No Carb Life video.
Oh, yeah. Which one?
They said, if you see Bill Gates at a barbecue, you might want to check what's on his plate before you give up your burger.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. A little food for thought.
Exactly. At the end of the day, we all have to make our own choices about what we eat, and hopefully this deep dive is giving you the information you need to do that.
That's what we're here for, to help you make informed decisions.
So thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, everyone.
We'll see you next time for another exploration of something interesting and thought-provoking.
Looking forward to it.
Until then, stay curious, keep learning, and happy eating, everyone.